What happens when a global retail giant decides the US isn't just another market, but the next big growth engine?
And what does it take to deliver style, quality, and affordability without compromising any of these three?
Plus, how do you build cultural relevance in a country where every brand is fighting for the same attention?
Today, we're talking with someone who is not only right in the middle of this challenge, but also sees and embraces it as an opportunity.
Primark's US Head of Marketing, Rene Federico, joins us to unpack the strategy behind their massive expansion, their new flagship in Herald Square, and why in-store experience is still the ultimate growth lever.
If you've ever wondered how a global brand breaks through in the US and what it takes to lead that kind of scaled effort, then stay with us. The answers might be surprising.
Welcome to the Retail Transformers podcast, part of the #1 indie podcast network for retail, where we break down the ideas, the leaders, and the bold moves reshaping the future of retail. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm Casey Golden. And today is a good one, because we're talking about a brand that has quietly, and now not so quietly, been rewriting the rules for value retail in the US.
Yeah, this is one of those conversations where you realize just how much the industry has changed. Marketing isn't just about great creative anymore. It's about growth, cultural relevance, and understanding how customers actually make decisions in a world full of creators, influencers, and nearly endless choice.
And our guest is right at the center of that shift. We're joined by Rene Federico, the US Head of Marketing for Primark, a global powerhouse with more than 50 years of history, a massive footprint across Europe, and a US expansion story that's just getting started.
Primark has been in the US for a little over a decade, but it still feels like they're at the beginning of their growth arc, even though they have 28 stores here. And Rene's helping shape what the next chapter looks like, from their brand new flagship opening in Manhattan's Herald Square to the Primark Studio and NoHo. It's redefining what a brand experience can look like.
And let's be honest, Primark is doing something most retailers struggle with. They're delivering style, quality, and affordability without compromising any of the three. That's the triangle everyone chases, and somehow they're sitting right in the middle of it and doing this all without a true e-commerce presence.
So we asked Rene the big questions. What does it take to build relevance in the US when you're already iconic in Europe? How do you market for footfall in stores instead of clicks? And this one's my favorite because stores are more important than ever. And how do you grow without losing the meaning behind your brand?
And she didn't hold back. We get into the creator economy, the shift from creative-led to growth-led marketing, why in-store experience is still the biggest differentiator, and how Primark thinks about cultural connection as the foundation for scale.
But before we jump in, just a couple of things. A quick ask from us. If you're enjoying the show, why not give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or Good Pods? It really helps more listeners discover the great conversations we're having here and really shows strong support for the show.
And if you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, trailers, or behind-the-scene clips, at some point bloopers. You never know, we might just release some outtakes.
And lastly, don't forget, the Retail Razor Podcast Network has even more great content for you. Check out the Retail Razor Show, Blade to Greatness, and Data Blades for deeper dives into leadership, strategy, and the data insights shaping the modern retail experience.
All right, let's get into it. Here's our conversation with Primark's US Head of Marketing, Rene Federico.
Rene, welcome to the Retail Transformers podcast. We are so excited to talk with you, learn from your experience, hear all the exciting things coming from Primark as you deepen your presence in the US.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have you on the show. I really look forward to learning more about how you're tackling the US market. But before we dive in, why don't you give us a bit of your background in retail and how you got to Primark? Tell us a little bit about your role And for those who may not be familiar with the brand, maybe you can give us the scoop on Primark itself.
Sure. So we'll end with the scoop because that's the fun part. I started my career on the retail sales floor. So I've always had a deep connection and a passion for how brands are able to connect their stories and connect their products to customers through retail as a platform. That was, I won't name them, but many years ago. And that was with the Nike brand, where I spent the majority of my career working through various marketing roles up through not just the retail management, but on the corporate side of management. And then also spent some time with the Converse brand, which is a Nike-owned brand. But always have found myself driven towards roles where I could be, in some way, play a part in creating that connectedness between brands and what they have to offer and customers, and finding ways to kind of fuse those things together. Essentially, the opportunity to come to Primark presented itself, and I really enthusiastically jumped at the chance. This is a brand that has been in the United States for a little over 10 years now, but still very much feels like it's at the beginning of our growth story here. And really, that sort of growth mindset was one of the things that attracted me to the brand, in addition to just a global brand, an iconic brand, really globally, having been founded in Dublin, Ireland, over 50 years ago, with a really strong presence in the UK and Europe and throughout the world. And really, the proposition we have to offer the US customer and the ability to step into a role as head of marketing to be able to drive those strategies that create those connectedness, that really is where my passion lies, was an opportunity that was impossible not to take advantage of.
Thank you, Rene. So Let's dive in. As a marketing, yes, right? This is all the good stuff. As a marketing leader operating at global scale, what's changed the most in how you make decisions compared to earlier in your career?
I mean, so much has changed, and there's been so much acceleration from both the perspective of brands and the perspective of consumers, and not the least of which are these massive platform shifts in terms of digital acceleration, e-commerce, customer expectations, and then the whole kind of globalization of the shopping process, right? I think from a marketing and brand standpoint, the biggest shift has gone from creative driving the conversation and really to growth driving the conversation. From a marketing perspective, creative and your brand story still plays an outsized role in marketing, obviously. But I think previously it was great creative and great storytelling that was the beginning and end of every meeting, if you will. And now it really becomes about how does marketing participate as a lever of growth in the overall enterprise, which is an exciting shift. There is something there to be said for the fact that marketing is not a tandem function, that it's actually key to driving enterprise growth. And I really love that about some of the shifts that have been making. And I will say, in addition to that, there's also just a lot more power in some of the platforms that exist around marketing, where before you used to sort of dictate strategy into platforms. Oh, here's our social media strategy. Here's our, media general strategy. Here's our communication strategy. So much of that is now more cyclical. And I think with the creator economy, with customers being able to have an abundance of choice, a lot of that paradigm has shifted a bit, and you really do have to listen and understand versus just project and broadcast.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. Do you think that that's in part because now there are, I guess, a growth of more digital channels to work into how you market to a customer, that means you're integrating more into every marketing motion?
There's not just more, but they're more powerful. I think you're right. If you look at social media, which used to be really just personal connections with people you knew or people you were interested in their content, those are massive commerce drivers.
Yeah.
now, right? The creator economy, the credibility that comes with working with some of these creators and influencers has huge impact on brands. Some brands are built on it. Really, some
Right.
brands are launched through that. You look at creators who ultimately become their own brands, right? Like Mr. Beast, for example, right? So I think it's not just an abundance of them, but it is how powerful they are in the ecosystem of business and in the ecosystem of consumerism. And again, all of that underscored at a global scale. I think that's where the conversation gets really interesting.
Yeah. And I think of it too. Primark is a global brand. You must see differences from region to region, market to market. So for example, Europe and the US probably look very different from that perspective for you, from the Primark perspective. How do you look at the role the US plays in your long-term growth story? How do you see that kind of shaping the direction and where you're going in Primark?
Yeah, I think we are a major player in the growth story. I think if you just look at the sort of size and scale of the US business, it does represent a lot of opportunity for the company in general. I think it's a different job to do. I think the brand in the UK and Europe is well established, well known. And so they're looking at how can we everyone's growth story probably takes two avenues. You're either trying to grow the pie or you're trying to take more share of that pie, right?
Right.
And I think that we probably sit more on the latter part of that. So what that looks like for Europe in terms of taking more share looks a little bit different than the United States because the makeup of retail is a little bit different. And the challenges to get consumer attention are a little bit different. I think the thing for us that is the real opportunity in the US as we think about this is we operate at a place where delivering style, quality, and affordability is uniquely a proposition we can offer. And we live at the center of that tension. And typically, retailers or brands will have to find some compromise in that, whether it be promotion cycles or last season's product or different things like that. We can live squarely in the middle of that tension and offer that proposition as actually a new and exciting proposition for the US consumer. But there's a ton of runway here for us in the US. Part of what we've been doing is really building that awareness around what our shopping experience is, the uniqueness of being able to deliver that sort of triad of value for customers, and then also making sure we're top of mind when they are ready to shop.
Like most retailers, I swear so many people forget that 80% of retail sales happen in store because all we have to do is talk about e-commerce.
Yeah.
But to you, in-store traffic is your primary growth engine rather than e-commerce. How does that fundamentally change the way you think about marketing compared to most retail brands today?
Yeah, I mean, to stay on just kind of where you were leading there, right? At the end of the day, it really becomes about what are you optimizing for? And there's a way to optimize for footfall in the same way there's a way to optimize for clicks. And so right now we're optimizing for footfall. I think that part of that generation cycle, though, is, and this is where I really think it's a bit of an inflection point in marketing right now, because there's a lot of dialogue around bottom funnel ROI, which is super important, right? But it does optimize towards the lowest common denominator, right? Which is just transact. And it kind of leaves behind that emotional connection building and the storytelling in between there. And so it serves a purpose, certainly. But the store experience is much more, it's a much bigger field of play, if you will, when we can optimize to get people into our stores and think about, creatively think about how do we shorten the distance between inspiring that customer and getting them to convert. Because the default when you get into some of those lower funnel e-com channels becomes really kind of quite clear. And then you're just kind of fighting a battle amongst battles, right? Just to get those clicks. So I think for us, in addition to that, we are so proud to talk about our store experience and what that has to offer. It's really grounded in an excellence that I think, in some in the retail space have walked away from a little bit. They're more than happy to not deliver an exceptional experience in store at the cost of getting customers in other ways. I think that's not a compromise we're willing to make. So we know once we get them inspired, once we're top of mind and we can get our customer in store, they're very likely to remain a loyal customer of ours.
Mm-hmm. What do you want someone to feel when they enter the store? What's that emotional connection and feeling that you're going for? Because you mentioned some things before about being in the middle of like style and value. And obviously that's a core part of the experience you want someone to feel when they come to the store. So is there a particular emotional feeling you're striving for when your customers come to the store?
Yeah, I would say our overarching is just that sort of feeling of joy. And that comes in a lot of ways. I think that is internalized through that individual. So it may be because they can find everything for their family in one place that they need to get. And there's just a sort of joy of being able to do that and not having that be a complicated process. It could be the joy of being able to afford everything you want to get. For a job interview or some other occasion that you're shopping for, the joy that comes from just taking a moment to do a little bit of that sort of self-care through shopping. So I think that, overarching, we're able to kind of relay our proposition through, even just if you love your closet, there's an everyday starting point from just a good, joyful place that you can start from. I think that's something that we can help enable, right? And so it's not just transactional. It's actually when you put something on and it gives you a level of confidence or just some other level of convenience, or you're doing that for your family. I think that is a proposition that we're able to offer our customers. There's, like I said, a lot around the excellence in retail that we're able to offer, but that joyful, energetic, thoughtful experience and around those kind of three themes around there's style there's affordability, and there's quality gives you something you can feel really good about.
I mean, that is really a goal, right? I love the emphasis on style. I feel like it's something that a lot of brands and retailers are just everything just kind of falling flat lately. I mean, I say this while we're both wearing black casual sweaters. But it's a holiday, people.
This is a choice. This is a vibe.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a choice.
It's its own vibe. Primark is very collection-led, which I am always attracted to. I love collections. I love capsules, but it puts a lot more pressure on product development. How do you evolve design and quality while still protecting the price points? I mean, these are the three triangles that it's so hard to have all three. You can get two, but you can't have three. But you guys are so focused on balancing these three so that a customer can get all of it. How do you guys manage to accomplish this? And how does product development is able to literally make this be able to go into production where you can get style, you can get quality, and you can afford it? And when I say afford, I hit and saw the price points of a navy blue varsity jacket, and it was $35. I'm like, wait, what? Right? I am to take every single patch I own to that. I am ready to we have a whole DIY project I want to do.
Great. That's what we love to hear. I mean, honestly, that is the exact reaction I love to hear. The rest of the secrets are locked in a vault. We can't talk about it, but that one piece of it. No, but actually we have some of the best teams in the industries that work on understanding trend, market, that work with our suppliers, that work on our ability to be able to deliver that. And I think more macro, we look at that sort of, we are confident in our proposition to say, it is about style, it is about affordability, and it is about quality. We will not walk away from one of those in order to make gains in another. We are truly committed to those three things. And then that is what shows up in what you just described, whether it's an exceptional piece for an exceptional value in a varsity jacket at $35. It could show up at a higher price point even too, right? It isn't that it is always below a certain threshold or things like that. It is, we're confident we can deliver that at those price points and stand behind what we're able to deliver there and do it at scale. And I think that's the thing that you're talking about as well. part of that also comes from, that is the actual founding principles of the company. In Ireland, over 50 years ago, was really about not just bringing one of those things to customers, but all three of those things. And so that has been part of the DNA of what makes us who we are. The piece at the end there, like the incitement you get where you're like, you really almost have to check your reality, where you're like, wait, what is this actually? That's what we love to hear. Exactly. That's what we're trying to recreate in terms of the marketing and things like that, is like, yes, trust us. This is a real thing. Like, yes, this is real life. And bring that forward. And we, using exceptional creative and storytelling, but also using, all those mid and down funnel tactics to be able to get people to understand that this is actually something very special.
I love the unwillingness to compromise.
Yeah.
I think consumers knowing a brand's promise and seeing it backed up over and over and over again, I feel like those are going to be the winners. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it really goes a long way towards building that kind of brand loyalty for that, because you're building up on that experience of it's like bringing in your realities, your consumer, that's one that they want, right? So they want to enjoy. Yeah.
Right.
So along those lines, I guess at the time that we're recording this, we're coming up soon, I believe, on you're opening a new flagship store in Manhattan, in Herald Square, right? And which I think in and of itself is a pretty big statement to make. And then you've also have Primark Studio location in NoHo, which is a very different kind of approach, I think, than what you're looking to do with a full flagship store. So what role do each of these two locations kind of play in shaping how you show up in the market?
Well, they're both serve an important purpose, like you said. The studio, which we opened back in November, was really our opportunity to add some dimension to the brand and do something a little bit unexpected. So it's not a retail space. It's more of an immersive expression of our brand to be able to invite customers into and be more tactile and learn more about it and do it on a smaller scale, a more personal scale than just, hey, here's a shopping experience and here's what we have to offer, but really give more upfront interaction with our product, really deepen the level of storytelling. One of the activations we did was actually your color wheel analysis, where we had customers lined up around the block for hours to come in and hear from experts on what colors, again, as we're sitting here in our black sweaters, what colors look best on them. And then we were able to provide them, say, hey, based on this is your color wheel. Take this with you, keep it in your wallet while you're shopping. And here's a bunch of our fall layering, options or offerings or capsules that you can go and shop that would look great on you, right? So it's really about a way to bring more of a tactile experience to the brand through the studio. Upcoming, we have a customization event for denim, right? Denim's a great piece. A lot of people like to keep their denim, and ours is, a great quality piece of denim. So we're doing denim jackets that you can come in and customize, because denim is one of those items I think people get quite attached to and they like to personalize. So we're doing a denim customization event at the end of the month. So the studio, again, was really a brand statement. What's that?
Ace's going to be lining up for that
we
one.
We got your invites ready.
Yeah,
Yes,
Ace will be first in line for that one.
Absolutely. I think the flagship at Herald Square is really a signal that we matter, not just in the U.S. retail landscape, especially in that particular area. I mean, Herald Square is the U.S. mecca of retail, and New York is the U.S. mecca of style, right? So when you show up in Herald Square at that scale that we're showing up with our flagship store, it really does signal that this is a marketplace that we're really enthusiastic about. And then also that we matter in the conversation around fashion, style, and retail in that landscape. So we're very, very excited about that opening. We're going to celebrate quite a bit around that opening. And we're probably most excited, or not probably, we are most excited about bringing our store experience at that scale to customers, because it really will help land all the things that make us different and special as a retailer in this marketplace.
Yeah, that to me is also super interesting, and looking forward to seeing how that how that comes to be. But I guess it also makes me think about, because you mentioned how that really elevates your presence in the market and really makes a statement of what you're doing and how you're showing up in the US market. But because you're a global brand, I imagine you have a number of things that you do to try to stay relevant locally in each market and relevant to each local culture. How do you kind of approach that as a marketing organization?
Well, I think what's great about working in partnership with our team at our world headquarters in Dublin is we're clear on who we are. And that is we are a style brand that is able to offer both quality and affordability. I mean, we're clear on that. We lead with a message of style, and we back that up through how our product and our experience and all the ways we interact with customers delivers on our full proposition. So that's clear. With that, as a US team, we can move with confidence to be able to adapt where we need to. As I said, in the UK and Europe, really well-known brand. And so what they need to do in terms of how to build equity, right, is different than what we need in the US need to do to build equity. But it all sits under the same overall narrative of what Primark is and how we drive distinction in that. And so we can move with confidence to be able to address what the US consumer needs to know and hear from our brand based on how we've landed an overall global proposition. So yeah, I think that it would be a lot more difficult if we didn't have the same conviction coming globally for us to be able to align to.
Primark has a huge presence across multiple markets. I went to college in France. I'm very familiar with Primark. I didn't realize there were any stores in the US, so my bad. Very excited that it'll be in Herald Square, especially after seeing a few items that I want to get my hands on.
Love that.
But what is the biggest marketing mistake brands make when they're trying to scale globally? We have so many brands today that are looking to expand to Europe for the first time. So many brands have failed to enter the US. And you guys have done it. What do you think one of those big mistakes is, and how are you guys able to avoid it?
Well, I think one of the things that there may be the potential to do is to try to scale without having built a really clear idea of how you remain relevant. And I think that is where there's a potential there that the scale becomes the chase, right? So, because even if you look at the US market, there is the size of the prize here in terms of apparel, however you want to cut it up, right? If you just look at apparel sales, take footwear out of it, take accessories out of it, just look at apparel sales. The size of the prize in the US is massive. And I think when that becomes your focal point, then you start to lose a little bit of what are the key building blocks to be able to get there, because there could be the tendency just to chase the end game of whatever revenue target that is, or whatever piece of market share represents a revenue target. So really kind of building that cultural relevance to be able to then go after those goals in a more sustainable way, right? Because you become meaningful. And when you become meaningful, there is inherent in that some sustainability and some staying power. And otherwise, I think the risk is that that push to scale kind of makes you interchangeable, which you commoditize everything and then you become interchangeable with other brands. And so, but if you really do truly focus on, okay, how is it that we can create meaning between what our proposition is and who our potential customer is, then that meaning, that connectedness can help drive your business through the phases of scaling. If you don't do that and chase the scale, you could definitely capture that revenue. My, I guess, watch out for that would be is you're going to spend a lot of time trying to backtrack yourself to go regaining some of that share, or backtrack yourself to reestablishing why you should be top of mind, or backtrack to reestablishing, what that awareness is to kind of keep you top of mind in a consumer standpoint. Now, if the goal is to be purely transactional, that can be the goal. But, I think that consumers make decisions based on different reasons. And if there isn't some connection or meaning for them in your brand, then you'll be forgotten.
Yeah, I said I see a lot of people over the last 5 years, in this race to the bottom. I'm yeah, not a race I'm interested in running.
Right.
On the sidelines, keep doing what I'm doing and have a little umbrella drink, totally chasing something else here. Going and selling something cheaper.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of, I think there's a commitment there because we've gotten, data is super important, right? And I think data as a decision-making mechanism is great. I mean, data is really like an infrastructure for decision-making, which is great. But it can be backwards looking. So it can push you in a place where you're not actually anticipating anymore. You're looking back and trying to beat the data. And then once you're beating the data, you're looking at the data. And I would say sometimes you got to pick your head up and look at the customer, right? Too.
That's a great point.
So you can see where you've been and where you're going, because you can't always take a 30-day dashboard and say, okay, cool, now we know what to do for the next 30 days, right?
Right.
So I think that's where you get, where you said, Casey, it's this sort of race to the bottom, there's this level of mediocrity there that I think puts brands at risk is just disappearing. Because unless you want to drive relevance in the same way you want to drive return on investment, to sacrifice one over the other too much. If you're super relevant but you have no ROI, you're not growing the enterprise. If you have amazing ROI and zero relevance, you can easily be replaced. I think marketing today is finding the balance between those two things in a way that is consumer-centric.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. What are the kinds of metrics that you look for to help you do that?
For us, we want to be measuring brand health in terms of how are we perceived? Where do we rank in terms of perception of our core proposition? And understand if there's room there where we need to kind of tailor or tweak our message. We really want to know how we can become more top of mind. What you just mentioned, once people know us and they start to learn a little bit more about us, we kind of got them hooked. So how do we make sure that we're a known entity in the markets that we operate in? So really quite a bit around brand health metrics. Certainly footfall and sales and other things are kind of the long-term attributable things that we want to drive. But right now, for where we are in the US, it really is to understand where does our brand sit in the mind space of the consumer.
What's a marketing bet that Primark has made that looked risky at the time, but ended up paying off? And maybe it's not even Primark. Just,
I mean, this, it's going to seem more elementary probably to most folks in the industry, but we made a bet on the top funnel. And I think in a world right now that is driven with down funnel tactics, we kind of confidently came out and said, if we want to deliver the bottom of the funnel, we got to fill the top. We have to.
Right.
And store growth is slow and steady, and it's meant to be built to be durable, right? Real estate is not a fast process. Store fit out is not a fast process, but there's some durability in store growth in our plans for that. However, it won't be fast enough to build awareness in our brand at scale. And so what we said was, in order to do that, we actually have to over-index on top funnel activity so we can start to deliver the bottom of the funnel in a more consistent way. And we've kind of taken a look at what that is. I think if you're reading the literature today, a good balance is probably 60-40 top. Even in saying that, the funnel is also quite different than it was, I would say, previous to some of the, digital acceleration and things like that. It really is quite more horizontal than it is top to bottom because your entry points are different. And then you go different ways from your entry point. And you go at them with more ease than trying to climb up to the top or fall down to the bottom. So I think just as a metaphor. But I will say that what we're able to look at was to say, first and foremost, we have to make people aware of who we are. And then we can place more of a focus on deepening that storytelling, deepening those connections, and ultimately delivering them in store and actually participating in our transactional, like participating in the business with transactions.
It's good.
Yeah.
If the funnel's changed so much. I mean, I don't
So
even know
much.
what the funnel looks like
absolutely.
right now for 2026. Like an org chart is literally flattening weekly in this industry.
Exactly.
now.
Exactly. And even the economies, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
in the literature
The
about
economy's switching to a
pay
K.
shape and
That's
all
right.
these different
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And,
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, and that's where I mean, part of being forward looking is that, sometimes data is, like I said, it's sort of where you've been. And
Right.
so I think you
Right.
have to in order to be forward looking, you have to be able to anticipate, okay, well, how do I operate in the marketplace of today? And how isn't that? And you got to keep the consumer in your dialogue, right? And how does that relate to the customer or the consumer? And then what does that look like? And I wouldn't even say, I think a 2-year plan is optimistic because
Right.
the change
Yeah.
happens
It changes so fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think you have to look in sort of quarterly increments, but in 6 months increments to make sure that you can pace up to where consumers are. Consumers are pulling brands more than I think brands are projecting on consumers and pushing them forward in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I guess that also is another point to make why, as you said earlier, to really be tracking brand health is so important because you need that really becomes your foundation, right? Regardless of what's going to happen in those next 1 to 2 years, that's the foundation you're building everything else on, no matter how flattened that funnel becomes.
Yes, exactly. I think anytime a brand is sitting back and saying, hey, we're driving transactions, but we're losing a sense, the customers are losing a sense of who we are, is a very important inflection point. And so I always keep that in mind and saying, hey, what are we delivering for the business? Absolutely core to making sure that's in our strategies and objectives, but how are we measuring how relevant we are to the customer? And do they understand who we are? And if we're starting to see that slip, we have to make sure that we're paying very close attention to that.
So I'm famous for throwing wrenches into the conversations.
Love it. I'm famous for catching them.
I love that. So if customers start shopping through AI agents and literally delegating, not just browsing or searching, but autonomous AI agents doing the shopping on their behalf, in your opinion, like what happens to brand loyalty and marketing if we're not marketing to humans? And how should brands kind of like prepare for that?
Yeah, I think that brand and marketing has to understand the role they play in a consumer's life and understand what it is they're able to enable for their consumers or their customers. And then being able to unlock that through whatever medium that consumer wants to use to interact with them. And so I think it can look different for a lot of brands. And I'm sure there'll be mechanisms by which you can pay your way in. And I'm sure there's mechanisms by which those consumers can dictate, this is where I want you to look or how I want you to look, or these are the principles or decision-making factors which need to drive those decisions. It's price, it's quality, it's reviews or whatever it is, right? There's going to be something that becomes the track by which that purchase happens. And I think brands are going to have to start to think about what role they play in the lives of their customers and how they're able to deliver on that. That's a big deal. And I think ultimately, too, the customers are going to decide what's right for them. I mean, we've already adopted, I would say, in general, culturally, letting other people shop for us, right? Whether you do Instacart,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even as early as early.com, where you say, you may also like, even when it wasn't that smart, right? Even when it's like, I'm shopping for a black sweater and they pull up something like lime green. It's like, you may like this. It's like, actually, no, I don't. But so even when that was AI, right? That was
it was the early days,
I'm like, you might be on there.
Exactly. But even when it wasn't good, it was there. And so I think we've always been conditioned to that consumerism or shopping being in some way augmented in some way. And I think we've gotten more and more comfortable. Whether you buy a car online and have it delivered to you, whether you use a chat bot to help you buy insurance or whatever those things are. I think there's been for decades even AI as part of your shopping experience. I think what brands are going to have to do future state is understand how they deliver their proposition through all the different platforms that are available to their customer. And then how those platforms help enable their customer to participate with them in the way that they want to participate with them.
Yeah.
And it should be fun. You know, I think it's certainly something that is very much talked about right now. And it's certainly something that I don't think any brand can operate with a future forward mindset and not be thinking about. And certainly we are. But it seems like something would be a really fun challenge to start to work on.
Yeah.
And at the same time, really understanding too, as you think about what evolves in the role of real tangible experiences, which I think remain very important for a very long time.
Yeah, no, I agree. Completely agree.
Yeah, I think we have like at least 3 generations on board that's like brand experience is top of priority.
Exactly.
Right.
And you see that in the trends in the spending. And I think there is like something about tangible. The more things get digitized, there is something about the tangibility of what brands have and even that inspirational piece. And you kind of see it all around you showing up. So,
yeah. When you think about these things in those terms and you kind of look even further out, maybe 5 years out, or what are the kinds of things you would say retail brands really need to be good at that maybe they're not thinking about today is going to develop, that's what their consumers are going to judge them on?
Yeah, I think it's going to be maybe a little bit more generalized. It's going to be agility. And I think that there is, however you can operate with some sense of agility, and that comes, whether it's your supply chain agility, whether it's your product, your product lifestyle agility, the agility with which you can react to trends, the agility with which you can surprise and delight customers. I think that's going to be the thing. I think where consumers are being trained for instant gratification in a lot of ways. And whether it's through streaming services or it's through things like Instacart, same day delivery, their choices really have become ones of any possibility. And so I think as a marketer, as you think about, okay, how do we serve the future needs of our customers? I think we have to start to understand what are those going to be and make sure that we have enough agility in what we're doing to be able to deliver that for them. And of course, that's within the context of your business. It's going to be different for us as a style brand than it would be for a brand that offers some other good or service. But I think that's going to be one of the key things. In terms of being able to actually stay relevant and stay top of mind for consumers, because there is no, that I've seen, there's no limit to what is being kind of pushed at them in terms of like marketing, messaging, opportunity, ways to participate.
This has just been like a great session on how Primark approaches expansion. I mean, as a global brand, and how brands can reach and communicate with their customers to build meaningful relationships and not to forget about driving in-store traffic. Like that is the game. That is the business we are in. That is the bread and butter of every single retailer's business, is that in-store traffic. Thank you, Rene, for sharing your experience and marketing perspective with us. So appreciated.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks again, Rene, for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing your knowledge and helping us appreciate how Primark is expanding and growing in the US. We're looking forward to the new flagship store. I know Casey will be first in line at the denim experience coming up.
Can't wait.
Yeah. Any last thoughts that you would want to share with our audience or about either Primark or your experience?
No, I think other than that, we're really optimistic about the U.S. marketplace, and we hope every listener, we hope we find some way to have you interact with our brand in some way.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Rene.
Thanks so much.
Ricardo, it's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
How much did you love this episode? Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Good Pods. And hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe before you go. I'm Casey Golden.
Follow Retail Razor on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram, and subscribe to our Substack for highlights and bonus content right in your inbox. For transcripts and guest info, head to retailrazor.com. Retail Transformers is part of the Retail Razor Podcast Network, the #1 indie podcast network for retail. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, stay sharp, be bold, and keep transforming retail. This is the Retail Razor Retail Transformers.